right. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, perhaps, depending on where you're joining us from. This is the African Governance Institute for Development. My name is Seyi Adisa, and I'm pleased to be joining you for the first edition of the month of November of our webinar. Today, we will be talking about what Aren telling us, the power of media in uncovering hidden truth. Thank you all for joining us. As is our custom, please let us know where you're joining in from in the chat box. It's good to see regular faces. Adelayo, welcome. Opayemi, welcome. Tolu, welcome. It's good to have you all online. I am extremely delighted with the guests we have today. It's a role model, someone that since I met last year, I've continued to study, and I'm sure we would all be excited to learn from our guest this evening. So we'll just give it a few more minutes to get more people into the room. The African Governance Institute for Development, as you all know, is all about good governance, ethical leadership, and national development. And we are part of the work we do is building leaders, but more importantly as well, engaging active citizens in terms of empowering them with the knowledge they need to become better citizens. And this is our first edition in the month of November. Last month, we had the conversation on the diaspora and the role of the diaspora on the continent. And we've been getting your feedbacks. Thank you very much. This evening, we will be going more into one of the governance values that is very important: transparency, accountability, and really the power of the media. So without further ado, I really want to get this conversation going. I am pleased to introduce someone that his resume is long, but I usually don't do this, but I feel obliged to actually just say a little bit about him. This evening, afternoon, wherever you are from, we have with us Hopewell Chinono, a distinguished Zimbabwe journalist, a documentary filmmaker, and a champion of press freedom and accountability. His career in journalism spans decades, marked by significant roles in the Africa field producer for ITV News. He's worked for Zimbabwe foreign correspondent for the New York Times. He's trained at the Zimbabwe Institute of Mass Communication. He's has a Master's of Arts in International Journalism from City University in London, and an MA in Documentary Practice from the Brunel University as a Chevening Scholar. Hopewell has produced impactful documentaries, including Painting My Heart and A Violent Response, and this has earned him critical acclaim and multiple awards. His work has highlighted urgent social and political issues, including Zimbabwe's HIV/AIDS crisis and post-election violence. He has been recognized with prestigious honors such as the CNN African Journalist of the Year Award, the Desmond Tutu Leadership Award, which is where I met Hopewell, and the USAID Communication Award. Beyond his professional accomplishments, Hopewell has demonstrated an unwavering commitment to transparency and anti-corruption efforts. In 2020, his reporting on COVID-19 procurement fraud led to the sacking of Zimbabwe's health minister, but also resulted in his repeated arrests and charged by the government. I think Hopewell spent about 45 days in prison for what he really believes in. And despite these challenges, Hopewell resolve has only strengthened, drawing international support from organizations advocating for press freedom and human rights. He's a Harvard Neyman Fellow, a Tutu Fellow at Oxford's Said Business School. He's engaged in global dialogues on leadership, on ethical journalism. His career embodies the intersection of courageous storytelling and relentless pursuit of justice. There's so much more, but I'll leave it here. Hopewell, thank you so much for being here this evening. And I would say my part, I met Hopewell last year at the Desmond Tutu Fellowship, and he was one of our facilitators. And he told us stories that some of us kept talking after the class, and we kept wondering, what sort of human being is this? Where do you still get people with such courage in this century? And I think your story is one that will really inspire us. Thank you so much, Hopewell, for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
All right, thank you. Now, I guess my usual question is, what are you up to now? Just maybe let's get a feel. I've read a bit of your background just so that the audience can know, some of the work you've done. But what are you up to now?
So at the moment, I'm living in South Africa, but I'm currently in London. And I'm starting some preliminary research on my next documentary film, which is called Beautiful. It looks at autism. Autism is a big problem in Africa. And in most cases, families, they tear each other apart because some believe that it's a curse from God, and yet it's a medical condition. So I thought that it's the right time to make such a documentary film, giving insights into how a lot of Black families, and most of them are young families, struggle to bring up kids that have the condition of autism, and how they fail to get community support because there is this stigma that is attached to autism. So sometimes it's important to make these documentary films because they allow society to understand what these problems actually are and how they can be dealt with, and how the community can come together to support families who have had the misfortune of having kids that have autism.
Absolutely. I'm sure we will all be looking forward to that documentary when it comes out. So let's start off. Could you share your journey into journalism? How did it begin? Was there a particular moment that threw you? I know there's somewhere I read that you when you were in class and the teachers wouldn't come in, you would ask why are the teachers not here, and almost take the names of the teachers not coming to class. So could you share your journey, how it all started, and if there was a particular moment that drew you into journalism?
Well, my career started in a very funny way, because I loved and I still love music a lot. And I was following specifically reggae music, and I used to write about it. So at some point, I wrote something, and a friend of mine encouraged me to take it to a magazine, which was a music national magazine called Price Beat in Zimbabwe. That was, I think, 1989 when I was doing my A levels, and the editor liked the article that I had written, and so he published it, and it was a very exciting moment for me. That was my entry into journalism. And because I was a young boy, I didn't even realize that I was going to be paid for writing the article. I just was so happy that it had been published in a national magazine, which was going to be read by a lot of people. And when I was paid, it was another form of incentive for me to continue writing, because it had never imagined to me that it had never occurred to me that I would end up, in such a situation at such a young age. So I started writing for this magazine, and my next article, I was sent to do an interview with what I would assume the biggest reggae musician at that time, Dennis Brown, who was called the Crown Prince by Bob Marley. And I went to interview him after school wearing my school uniform. I was a student at Marlborough High School. This was now 1990, when I was doing my final year in A level. And then when I wrote that article, it just blew up. Everybody was talking about my interview with him. There were pictures published when we were seated together, and I was wearing my school uniform. I was such a young boy. And yeah, that gave me the drive to want to do more. And I continued writing until I finished my A levels. And my parents wanted me to go to law school. and my brother wanted me to go and do some science uh, degree or a course in science, because he said to me that science was the real thing. But I ended up going to the Zimbabwe Institute of Mass Communications, where I studied journalism, majoring in print, which is basically newspaper journalism.
All right, thank you. Now, I mean, obviously, journalism is very broad. Was there a defining moment where you decided to go to more of investigative journalism, uncovering hidden truths? Was there a particular time, and do you want to tell us about it?
Well, this came later. So what happened was, when I graduated from the Zimbabwe Institute of Mass Communications, I then left for the United Kingdom, because my dream was always to go and get trained in England. I grew up with a father who was very conscious of news. So we used to listen together after supper to the BBC World Service. And so it was a source of inspiration for me. I wanted to go there because I used to listen to other Africans who were broadcasting on the BBC World Service. People like Veronica Edwards from Cameroon. There were some Nigerian journalists that were working for the BBC World Service that I used to listen to. And I really wanted to be part of that, because I thought that was the epitome of journalism, to end up with the BBC. So I left and went to the United Kingdom. I worked a bit to raise money to pay my school fees. And then I went to City University in London, where I read international journalism. It was a Master of Arts degree focusing on radio journalism. And as was always my dream, my father had always told me that in life you should never think that you can't achieve anything. So I was just this rural boy who was brought up with this father who was always encouraging me to do the things that I thought maybe were out of reach for someone like me. And when I started my master's program, there was a part of the program where we had to be attached to media organizations. And I ended up at the BBC World Service, where I was then trained as a radio journalism. So it was like full circle, from listening to the BBC World Service when I was young to ending up there, being trained there by some of the biggest names in radio journalism that we used to listen to when I was a young boy. And my father was really excited when I used to tell him that, I'm working with Robin White. He's the one who's training me, and Robert White was a legendary figure and name in radio journalism internationally. I don't know, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I was just checking to find out if it was my network. All right. Thank you. I missed the last few points there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
All right, fantastic. All right, so let's go straight into it. Hopewell. So journalism obviously comes with risk, and you have been a symbol of, if you like, exposing injustice. You've been a symbol of, some say, defiance, of just standing for the truth, despite the risk, despite all of the things that are involved in it. Did you prepare yourself for this? Did you or how do you choose a career that is full of risk? How did you prepare yourself for this life?
Well, when I went into journalism, I never envisaged the type of world that I ended up operating in, because at that time in the 90s, early 90s, Zimbabwe was fairly a democratic society. The repression that had taken place in the early 80s, where there was a genocide in Matabeleland, had sort of resided, and there were efforts by the government to try and give as much freedoms as they could at that moment in time. So we never thought of a time where we'll be fighting a corrupt, a repressive, and violent government like what we have today. So when I went into journalism, it's not something that I thought about, because I never thought that I would end up in such a situation. I always imagined that Zimbabwe's rights to freedom of speech, and basically human rights, were going to be enhanced as time moved on. I didn't realize that we were going to end up at a time where they were going to be rolled back. So the moment when I realized that things had gone wrong was when I went back home in 2003 to settle, and after my studies in England. And in 2004, I got a call from the then editor of the BBC World Service, the Africa section, called Joseph Warungu. He said he wanted to offer me a contract so that I could work as a BBC correspondent for the World Service from Harare. And when I went back to Zimbabwe, there was a new law that had been introduced where we were supposed to register with the Zimbabwe Media Commission. It was a way of the government figuring out how to control the flow of information from Zimbabwe to the international community, and even control local newspapers, which they thought were errant. And so when I went back home to register as a BBC World Service correspondent, I was then told that I could not register as a BBC World Service because the BBC had been banned after the violent farm invasions that had taken place from 2000, and the new opposition, the Movement for Democratic Change, had came on the scene, and it was threatening to remove the government through elections. Elections had to be rigged to stop the Movement for Democratic Change from basically becoming the new government and removing ZANU-PF from power. So the repression had now started in earnest, and it was difficult for me because I couldn't work. So sometimes I would work undercover, but it was difficult because for radio, if they hear you on BBC Radio and you're living in Zimbabwe, you would then be sought after by the state security services, and then they would prosecute you for operating without a license. So at that point, that's when I realized that I was now working in a very dangerous environment. I never imagined that journalism was dangerous. What was dangerous was the environment in which I was operating in, because there are some countries, a lot of them, where journalism is nothing but just a joy, where you don't have to worry about your door being knocked down by state security because you've reported something that the president or his political party does not want.
Right. Let's talk about the reporting, because obviously that's where a lot of some of these stories we read about.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, good evening, sir. Yes, we can hear you. I think we're having a bit of some technical difficulties, but he
Yeah.
would be working to restore himself back
During
on the
COVID,
call.
during COVID, it was said you reported the 60
I can't hear him again. I just heard where he said during COVID.
million equipment. Hello, can you hear me?
I didn't hear anything, but I can hear you now. I just
All right, I'll
we
just
lost
take
each
that. I'll
other.
just take that again. All right. I said during the COVID era, it was said you exposed the $60 million protective equipment for healthcare workers, and that was a big deal. And that led to the arrest of your good self, and you even spent as much as 45 days in prison. You know, you came out and said, "My life is now in danger, but I will not be a coward to fear." And I mean, you know, in the midst of all of that, you spoke the truth. You spoke the truth to power. When those things were happening, what gives people the type of courage, knowing fully well the dangers ahead, knowing fully well the dangers that exist, and yet your courage stays intact, saying that, yes, I'm in danger, but I will not cower. I will not. I mean, I think that was probably one of the things that just really attracted me to you and inspired me, that you were able to speak truth to power, and you displayed courage even through the process, having to go in. And even when you went into prison, you came out even advocating for better prison conditions. So talk to us about that whole experience, and what gives, maybe if you like, what gives that courage even in the midst of danger to stay amidst all the fears out there. I mean, I think that was the question I asked then, and I still want to ask it now.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the background to the story was that in 2020, COVID hit the world. And I was writing a lot about what was happening around the world. I remember when it hit, I was in England in January, and then February I flew back to Zimbabwe. And I was writing articles where I was complaining about the lack of preparedness by the Zimbabwean government. I was looking at what other governments across the world and even in Africa were doing, like the Rwandese government. They were on the ball, making sure that any new information that comes in about this condition, which was new to the world, was quickly acted upon by the government and its agencies. And so this lack of preparedness, where the whole country of Zimbabwe had only about 7 oxygen machines in a country with about 16 million people, was absolutely ridiculous. And I then stumbled upon information that there was a $60 million fund, which was meant to alleviate the problems that were going to be brought on by COVID. It was meant to help the health sector. And that this fund was being looted by the president and his family. They were setting up pseudo companies, bogus companies that did not exist, and they would then give those companies tenders using their front people. And I started investigating and was reporting on a daily basis. It became a crusade of reports about how this fund was being looted, and how they were lying that the company is based in Dubai and has got branches in Europe. And I went around investigating whether it exists in Dubai or in the EU, and it didn't exist. And yet money had already been wired. I think about 2 million euros had been wired. And it turned out that the supposedly headquarters of this company in Europe was actually a rundown block of apartments. And in Dubai, it didn't exist. It was also an apartment building. And when the ruling party came out and denounced and demonized me for having done this investigation, they warned me that I needed to stop, or I will be stopped. But for me, what was important was the fact that my reports were going to help people of Zimbabwe, particularly the poor, who did not have access to healthcare. As I said, we only had about 7 oxygen machines, the whole country. And that in itself inspired me to continue reporting, regardless of the threats that had been put out by the ruling ZANU-PF party through its spokesperson and former legal affairs minister, Patrick Chinamasa. And eventually the health minister was fired because the reports that myself and another journalist were putting out were proved to be true. But his departure, his resignation, as it were, or being fired, was not based on a sincere president or a sincere government. It was a way of making him the fall guy so that the scandal would go away. I continued reporting about it until the 20th of July, when I was then arrested. 7 gunmen came to my house, walked into my compound and broke my dining room door, which was a French door. So they broke it with a butt of a AK-47 and came inside the house. I was now hiding in my bedroom, but they came to my bedroom and they opened the bedroom. And I was recording when they were going into the house. I was holding the cell phone like this, and they thought I was just recording, but it was actually Facebook Live. So the world got to know what was happening at my house in real time. So coming back to your question, since I've given you this background, what inspires me to continue doing this is the importance of making sure that the public funds that are being looted, the country's natural resources that are being plundered, are not plundered and the money is not looted. Because when public funds are looted, it means that we have opened a door for people to die, because it means health institutions do not get funded. To give you an understanding of how bad things have been in Zimbabwe, for 3 years, the whole of Zimbabwe's public health sector didn't have a single working radiotherapy cancer treatment machine. People were just dying. The biggest hospital in Zimbabwe only has one maternity theater, which was built in 1977 by the colonial government. It costs only $37,000 US dollars to build one, but the government didn't see it fit, and up to now they haven't seen it fit to do so. So these are the kind of things that inspire me to do what I'm doing. And although there is danger involved, as we have seen, I've been arrested 3 times inside 6 months. I've been intimidated. False information about me being a fraudster in England or wanted in England has been put out by the Secret Service, and they pay unscrupulous journalists to go and publish using discredited fake news websites and keep repeating it, hoping that it will taint my image. Each time I get these people fighting me, I then realize the importance of my work, because they wouldn't be so invested in trying to taint me or to fight me if what I was doing was not a good thing for the ordinary people. Because these are people that are fighting against ordinary Zimbabweans, people who have no money, who have no pensions because their pensions have been looted by the current government, and people who go to hospitals that don't even have paracetamol. Central hospitals, sometimes they run out of water. Just this week, the biggest hospital in Zimbabwe didn't have running water. Surgeons didn't know what to do when they wanted to do operative surgery. So it's important for us as journalists to realize that we are not just doing it as work. We are not just doing it because we were trained to do it. We are doing it because each time we take our torch into dark corners, it reveals a lot of things, and it helps and it mitigates the type of problems that Africa as a continent is facing, and my country, Zimbabwe specifically, is facing.
Wow. That is certainly something to think about. Hopewell, thank you for sharing that experience. I actually asked that question because in Nigeria, and when we have a lot of conversations with young people, there's the sense of, well, we want to do more, but we're afraid. Government will come after you, and people will come after you, and so there's a sense of, there's an awakening, there's a consciousness. Young people are more aware of their rights, and they want, and this is across the continent. This is not just in Nigeria. We saw the protest in Kenya, and we're seeing it in different African countries. But then there's always that question of, and there was the End SARS in Nigeria, and there's always the question of, I want to do more, but I am afraid that if I go out there, my family will be in danger, or I will be in danger. And here you are telling us of your experience of knowing fully well the dangers involved, yet just being able to prioritize the importance of the world knowing, the prioritize the importance of people knowing. And one, probably the way I rationalize it is sometimes your convictions have to be greater than your fears. Sometimes what you stand for has to be greater than what you are afraid for. Do you have any because I'm sure, for you to have uttered the statement, my life is now in danger, is there a strategy you use to keep yourself even in these very perilous times when you're going through this, the arrest and all of this? Are there things that, we should bear in mind when we are confronted with evil and want to stand for good, when we are confronted with danger and yet want to stand up with good? Are there things that inspire you? I know you talked about the motivation, but is there more? Is there something? Is it because the average person would think, oh, maybe Hopewell has 9 lives. Maybe he has, maybe he can get out whenever he wants to get out. People will probably make excuses for that. But you've shown us that even in the midst of danger, I will stand up for the truth. You've been arrested 3 times in 6 months. There has to be something that is really behind that. And I would love if you could explain that to us, please.
As I travel around the world, I see countries that used to be poor or poorer than Zimbabwe. I've been to places where the GDP was lower than Zimbabwe in the 60s and the 70s, places like Qatar. And I've looked at the transformation that has taken place in those countries and how this transformation has helped the citizens of those countries to have a better quality of life. Just next door to us, where there's just been a change of government in Botswana. Botswana used to be a dusty country with no tarred roads. There was no paved roads. But today, it's proving to be a world-class country by African standards. In fact, it is the country with the lowest corruption in Africa. And when I look at what this kind of leadership can provide for citizens and can provide for the country and for future generations, because if you look at a country like Botswana, again, you have to look at the incremental changes that have taken place and how they've benefited generation after generation, from the 80s to going to the 90s, now to the 2000s, 2010s, or 2020s. And when you look at that, it gives you some fearless element which just kicks in. It gives you some kind of inspiration that one can't really describe in words, but you feel fired up to say, this is the kind of life I want for my people. This is the kind of life I want in my own country. Yesterday, we were driving in the countryside in England, where my friend lives, where I'm staying at the moment. As he was driving, I was filming the road, and I was saying to him, imagine this could be us in Zimbabwe. So when I see that, and when I see and realize that we have the resources to do these things, because you look at the costing of doing all these things, and you realize you have the resources. If Qatar can do it, if Botswana can do it, what is stopping us? Those are the things that inspire me. It keeps me awake at night thinking about the importance of making sure that citizens understand, because we live in a country which is probably the only country of any significance in Africa with only one TV station, which is controlled and owned by the state. So the people know what they've been exposed to. So as journalists, it's our job not just to investigate and expose, but also to teach people, to make them realize that there's a better world out there and that those opportunities lie on their feet. They will be able to do it if they realize that the people or the political elites are taking advantage of them. They are looting public funds that should be doing this kind of work. We live in a city where there's running sewage in Aren, which is the capital city of Zimbabwe, and running sewage in all the other cities. We don't have clean drinking water. In the most affluent of areas, they don't even have clean drinking water. You have to drill boreholes even where the political elites live. That's how dilapidated the system has become. We used to have a railway system which was even better than the British railway system in the 60s and 70s. But today we don't even have trains that are running. There are no passenger trains that are running. The president the other day, I think it was this year, was even asking whether there are still trains. The president himself was in charge of the country, didn't even know. And he was asking this question when he was meeting his ministers. So those are the things that inspire me. It breaks my heart when I go to South Africa, where I have a home, and I see all these other good things that are happening to citizens of that country. They are even complaining that the quality should be better. And I'm thinking, if these things were in my country, we wouldn't even be complaining. So, as a journalist, you realize that you've got to play your role. You're not a politician. You're not going to have your name on the ballot paper. So the only thing you can do is to educate people and hope that through that education and knowledge that you give them, they will be able to make the right decisions for their own families, for their children, for the future of their own children and grandchildren, and to make sure that this kind of work is not just about getting a salary, but it's about helping a country move away from the predicament it currently finds itself in to a better place. And the only way we can do that is knowledge. Knowledge is power. That's why dictators do not want us to have more television stations. They do not want us to have access to social media. Sometimes they even cut the internet, like what happened in Zimbabwe in 2019. They do not want people to speak to each other about their experiences and to share their pain, because they realize that the more people engage with each other, the more they lose their fear. And they don't want the citizens to lose their fear. They want citizens to be constantly afraid of the state and to conform to the repressive regimes that they run.
Wow, that's truly inspiring, truly inspiring. So I heard you say that the love for country, the love for the people, love even for your children that will come after us. It's so important that it continues to motivate you. And I sincerely hope that, we would all take that for the love of Nigeria, for the love of Ghana, for the love of Kenya. We will speak up. We will be a part of the change and not be part of the problem. You said some very interesting things. The more people engage, the more people lose fear. The more people engage, the more people lose fear. And I think that is so important to highlight. You started speaking about social media. So I want to take you to that, Hopewell. With the rise of digital media platforms, what role do you think, if you like, citizen journalism will play in challenging those in power? And just before you answer that, I want our audience to start putting up your questions in the chat box. In another 10 minutes or less, we will start taking your questions. So if you have any questions for Mr. Hopewell, please do put your questions in the chat box. But I just wanted to ask again, the rise of the decentralization of media, and I was quite intrigued to know that you said in Zimbabwe there's just one a TV station and it's owned by the states, and that just tells me many things. What do you think young citizens can play in challenging those in power using social media?
I think social media is a blessing for countries like ours, particularly countries like Zimbabwe, because it is given an opportunity for journalists like myself to have platforms where we can write our stories. In the past, we needed newspapers, we needed radio stations and TV stations, and these were controlled by government or by specific interest groups that would not allow any other narrative than the one that they are pursuing to serve their interests. So I think it's important to note that most of the work that I've done, which have gotten me into trouble, has been done using social media platforms like Twitter, which is now called X, or Facebook, or Instagram. And now I see journalists in Kenya, in West Africa, they're using TikTok a lot, and it's something that I've joined as well. I don't have as many followers. I have, I think, about 36,000 followers on TikTok, compared to about 780,000 on Twitter. So these are mediums that are important in disseminating information. They are also dangerous in the sense that they are used for spreading fake news. They are used for spreading hate, and these are things that we should guard against. But it's important that the greater good that has come from social media has been the ability of the citizen to broadcast at any given time. There are people that use Facebook Live, they use Twitter Live to broadcast as things are happening in their communities. How, for instance, cartels in cities are failing to pick up rubbish bins. They're able to broadcast about these things. They're able to broadcast violence. We're seeing what's happening in Mozambique through citizen journalism. Citizen journalism is good, but we must also understand that it doesn't have filters. So sometimes you have to be careful about the source of that information, because some of the people that are getting into citizen journalism, they're doing it for the wrong reasons. But a lot of the people that are using citizen journalism, they're transforming their communities and making sure that the problems that were hidden, that traditional media, or what's called legacy media now, they were not covered by legacy media or traditional media, they are now being covered. But as I said, we must be cognizant of the dangers and to guard against the dangers, especially by people that use it to spread hate, to spread lies about other people, and to try to tarnish the image or images of people that are doing good in their communities. Governments are also now using social media, using trolls. In Zimbabwe, the president set up and encouraged his trolls that are called Varakashi, the slayers, and essentially these are the negatives that we face. But I think the positives are far much higher than the negatives. They outweigh the negatives. So it's important. Most of the tips that I get that end up that leads to me ending up investigating coming from people that are using social media. Without social media, they would not have gotten hold of me. Most of the investigation part of the investigation that I did on the COVID looting came from citizens that were using social media to get hold of me. And we're sending documents, some within the state, even state security people who, when I was threatened that I was lying about a certain guy being linked to the president and his family, it was some people in Secret Service that sent me a document, which was an invitation to a dinner sent to that guy by the First Lady. So without this kind of citizen journalism, we would not have been able to investigate. But I think in my case, it was different because people are coming with the information, and because I'm a trained journalist with a reputation to protect, who understands the importance of ethics, you are able to sift through this information and put out things that are correct. That's why we are never sued. But with people that are reporting from home, the only thing they need to do is to make sure that whatever they are reporting is true, and to make sure that they do not use social media as a tool to spread hate, to spread lies, to spread fake news. I've been a victim of fake news and lies by some outfit, some discredited Zimbabwean website. This is done. They recycle Secret Service propaganda that is meant to tarnish you. For instance, saying that I'm wanted in England. The British government, through its embassy, to issue a statement to say it's a lie, or that I changed my name because I'm running from some criminal activities that I took part in England, and I had to put out documentation to say I changed my surname legally. It's documented both in Britain and in Zimbabwe. Or they will come and say, how did he manage to buy a house at 29, such expensive house in an affluent area? And they run with the fact or the lie that you have been involved in criminal activities, something that is not factual, but they want to make it seem that it's a fact. And I have to put out a letter from the building society to say, no, this is not true. This is my letter showing that I got a mortgage. So that's the downside of social media. But I think we have to focus on the good that it has brought. It has given us platforms that allow us to perform as journalists in countries where journalism is under attack, countries like Zimbabwe, where journalism is under attack. We're able to use platforms like Twitter, platforms like Facebook or Instagram, and for visuals, we're able to use platforms like TikTok. So yeah, it is important that it's there, but we just have to guard against those dangers.
Wow, thank you for that balance, and I think that is so important to note, especially when, like you said, the motives might not be for the right reasons. So it's always good to understand where people want to trend, or where people just want to jump on the trend. Sometimes they make things up, and I think that balance is really key to note. I'll ask a last question, and I'll open the floor up. Hopewell, what advice would you give to young people who want to make a difference? They want to be transparent. They want to do truth telling. They want to do all of these things, and they're looking at someone like you, and well, you're an inspiration. But how? This is where I am. How am I going to, be able to do all of these sort of things? I really want to be part of the solution, but I'm just not sure. I'm too afraid. There's so many things going on. What would you tell such a young person?
I think, as you mentioned yourself, that your conviction must be stronger than your fears. That's a powerful line that I will use from today. It's an important line that we need to put out there for people to understand that it's important to have a conviction. It's important to have a set of principles. And to young people that want to do the kind of stuff that I do, I say, please go ahead and do it. Don't be intimidated by fear. There is a reason why you have a particular skill or talent. Use it if you can. It's important to make sure that you help opening up your communities. People get to know what's happening. If there are bad things that are happening in your community, you must expose them. It's important as we grow and get older to realize that what you might thought was a small thing actually ignited a whole set of events, resulting in certain things happening and certain people and their lives being saved. If you're able to expose corruption involving equipment at a hospital being stolen or medication being stolen, the difference that exists between life and death is whether you decide to write about it or not. So as I said, in the COVID investigations that I did and the exposure of the scandal, it saved lives, because that money that they were about to steal or that they had started stealing they could have stolen more. They were selling a mask which costs 50 cents. They were selling it to the state for $30. And it's industrial looting, of unimaginable proportions. And if I and another journalist called him Dudusi Matutu had not gone deep investigating this thing, it would not have seen the light of day, and they would have looted with reckless abandon and with nobody stopping them. But the fact that we put it out there and it becomes a record at a particular time, at the right time, when we have maybe a change of government and people want to take stock of what happened in the past, what needs to be redressed. These reports are important because they have facts and figures, they have bank accounts, they have names, they have names of cities and towns. And it will be much easier for whoever wants to investigate it another time, whether for historical reasons, to go back to that. If we don't expose, if we don't document, it makes it easy for these criminals, political criminals that masquerade as leaders. It makes it easy for them to go out there and loot public funds and plunder the countries that they are supposed to be leading, making it difficult for citizens to survive. In Zimbabwe, as I said, we only have one maternity theater, the biggest hospital, and it has resulted in 2,500 Zimbabwean women dying every year because of the looting and the plunder. And 2,500 women dying every year giving birth is an equivalent of 13 jumbo jets crashing every year and killing Zimbabwean pregnant women. And that is something that would not be tolerated if it was happening in a civilized country. But it shows that we are being run by savages that do not care about the quality of life that their people live. They steal money using the central bank. They game and play the exchange rate. They come with phony currencies to try and steal US dollars and other hard currencies that are available in the country. They are callous, cruel, and they don't care about the quality of life that is led by their own people. So it's important for young people to realize that they have a role to play. Young people will not always be young people. They're going to get old. What they do today as young people could be the difference for them having a better life when they are elderly people like myself. I'm now 53 years old. The things that I did 20 years ago have a direct bearing and on how I'm living my life today. And if we remember this as a group of people in a nation, we realize that our combined effort when you are young will be the difference between good and bad when you're old.
Thank you so much, Hopewell. So now the floor is open. I would let our moderator put up the questions. Hopewell, please feel free to take them. We have just about just maybe over 15 minutes or so to go, and I see quite a few questions. So I'll just let you take the questions, and we'll take it after that. Thank you.
Okay. I don't have my glasses. Let me read.
Okay, I could read it for you if you want me to.
No, I think I can say I've enlarged it. So it says, in your country, what groups or organizations do you know that are instigating change and making a difference to reduce political corruption? There's in our country, there's Transparency International, which of course it's an international organization. There's an organization run by a guy called Farah Mgu that looks at the plunder of the country's natural resources like diamonds. It looks at the impact on our society, and there are civil society organizations like ZimCode. It looks at the expenditure by government on public goods, and it reminds them that what they promised did not happen. I think we've got another one called Civios. What it does is to track the promises that were made during election campaigns and to see whether those have been implemented. I would have liked these organizations to be as more exposed as my work is. Unfortunately, I don't know what needs to be done. I think I have an idea that they need to be helped in their communication, but it's something that they have to realize themselves and then seek the help from the people that have these skills. But these are important groups of people in my country that are fighting corruption. We are supposed to have what's called the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission. This is a state organ, but it doesn't do its work. It's captured by the ruling elite and by the president, who runs criminal cartels. Is like a mafia don, and he appoints the people that run this organization. So obviously they are not able to do the work they're supposed to be doing because they are captured by the president and his political elites. So in your opinion, what are the 2 or 3 solutions that the public can do that you believe can reduce corruption in your country? I think the public must expose people involved in corruption from top to bottom. We have been able to expose corruption at the top level, the president, the ministers, the councillors, but it's important for citizens in your communities where you live to expose the small corruption, because it's small in your communities, but it gets bigger if you put it together. If somebody is stealing council property. If two people steal 2 pieces of land in a particular council area, we've got over maybe 50 councils. It means if 50 people do the same thing, that's 100 pieces of land that have been stolen across the country. So it becomes incremental. So it's important for citizens to understand that they must report these things. They must expose, they must come to the media if they have the evidence. If it's something that can be shown through video or documentation, you should send that documentation to the media. I think the second thing is to understand that we as individuals have to say no to corruption. If we are susceptible to corruption, it means other people are susceptible to corruption as well. They end up doing the very things that are that have destroyed our society or our societies across the continent. Right now, many Africans, they all trek to South Africa or they die trying to cross the Mediterranean to go to the European Union because of corruption. Our countries are not fit for purpose. They're not able to give the jobs that are required by young people. In my country, there's 95% unemployment. We have the highest inflation in the world. We don't have clean drinking water. Hospitals are not working. Young people do not have jobs. Schools do not have books. We have 20-hour load shedding, which is power cuts. We only get power for 4 hours. Sometimes we cannot. Sometimes we don't even get it the whole day. All these things are caused by corruption. So we must understand that in order for us to live a better and quality life, we need to do this. We need to report. And when these reports come out, if it's social media, retweet it all the time, reshare on Facebook, share in your WhatsApp group so that you reawaken people who are in a slumber, who don't understand what's going on. When you come across information on social media that helps and serves your community, share it, retweet it. A lot of people love reading stuff and then they don't share it. So if you read stuff and you don't share it, you can't blame other people for not being awakened or for not being cognizant of what's happening around them because you have been selfish yourself. You have not shared. So if thousands, if millions share information like other societies, if you look at Twitter in countries like South Africa, or if you go to India, they share. They are very adept at doing these things. As Africans, we are yet to understand the importance of sharing information. We come from countries which have repressive media because of repressive laws and dictatorships that do not want things to change. And because of that, it is impossible, or it has become impossible for people to understand what's going on around their communities. And so the advent of social media has given us an opportunity and platforms for us to share information and to shame these people that are looting public funds and destroying our countries through the plunder of our natural resources. The quality of life will change if public servants realize that they will be exposed if they do get themselves involved in corruption. You are really inspiring. Thank you. My question, our generation is very hungry for authentic news with all the gory details. So we turn to social media platforms, especially TikTok. However, social media news can also be misleading with conspiracy theories and the likes. How can we discern authentic news from fake news? This is something that I've already addressed when I was having a question and answer session, in the question and answer session. I think it's important for you to always cross-check information. If you see information that is circulating in social media, go and check on Google, go and check, use AI tools that are available. They're able to check for you as well. And I encourage journalists to also use AI tools to cross-check whether information is correct or not. This is a very important question because even the repressive regimes, the dictatorships, they are putting wrong or fake news deliberately in order to to confuse people, in order to mislead people. So it's important to always check. If you see something shared on social media, on WhatsApp, go onto Google and check, see whether it has been shared by an authentic news source or by a credible news source. If you are living in Zimbabwe, you can always come and check on handles like mine, whether I've shared it or not, because I would never deliberately share fake news. So when you see me posting, it means I would have checked. So it's important to use Google and to use AI tools that are available now online. I have noticed that the majority of Nigerians aren't well educated and knowledgeable about their rights and how they should be governed. What strategy can we journalists deploy to get Nigerians get interested in knowing their rights and thereby demanding the right governance from the government? It's important for Nigerians, and I say this wholeheartedly because I've worked from Port Harcourt and I've reported from Lagos, so I have a fair idea of a bit of Nigeria, and I've got Nigerian friends, and I think it's important for us as journalists, whether it's across the continent or for us journalists reporting from Nigeria, to always realize that our duty does not stop with just reporting news. Our duty is also it also involves holding those in power to account, and we should use our personal social media handles to continuously educate our people. This is what I've done. 5-6 years ago, I had only 400 people following me on Twitter, and I decided in 2017 or 2018 to change that. And I said I need to use my social media handles. I was working in international media as ITV News Africa producer, and then I left to write for the New York Times. And I was not engaging with the local masses in Zimbabwe because I was working in international media. But when I started using my social media handles, from 400 people following me on Twitter, I now have about 780,000 people following me on Twitter. All in all, I've got over 1.3 million people following me because I've become a legit and credible source of information in Zimbabwe. When people know who I am, they know where I live, they know what I do, they know my qualifications, they know what I've done. And so they give that trust, not recklessly. It's based on the fact that I've earned it. And you as journalists as well need to do the same thing, to use your social media platforms to educate people, because it seems people nowadays do not trust traditional media. Some don't even bother opening traditional media websites. Some live in countries like Zimbabwe, where all the broadcasting institutions, all radio stations are controlled by ZANU-PF, which is the ruling party. I think out of all the daily newspapers that we have, only one is as close as you can say independent. So it's important for us as journalists to use our social media platforms to articulate these issues on a day-to-day basis, to give examples of what's happening in other countries. For instance, in Zimbabwe, elections have always been stolen, rigged by the ruling party. But people in Mozambique are pushing back. It's important for people like myself to show people that in this country, this is what they're doing. This is how they are asserting their rights. And it's important for us to educate them on their rights. What are they? What are they entitled to? What does the Constitution say about their rights and freedom of expression? Freedom to be who they want to be as citizens. And when it comes from journalists, it's credible. And when it comes from dodgy characters, they then occupy that space. You end up with influencers who are working for specific interest groups. Politicians capture social media influencers, and they pay them to push certain narratives. So as journalists, we need to occupy that space, and we need to occupy it jealously, and to make sure that we do not cede it to people that are pursuing narrow-minded objectives and narratives which are meant to benefit a small group of political elites, corrupt elites for that matter. Investigative journalism should be based on, this thing of being objective, or is it inherently subjective? I don't deal in subjective or objective. I deal in facts. You should just produce facts. Everything should be based on facts. If I say that today is Tuesday, when it's not Tuesday, you should put the fact that no, this is not Tuesday, this is actually Wednesday, or this is Thursday, but you provide the evidence. So I don't see myself and my reports as being subjective or being objective in any way. I just report the truth, and I don't report the truth to pursue a particular objective other than reporting the truth and exposing those that are doing bad things or exposing wrongdoing. So I think as journalists, we should stick to facts. If you stick to facts, that's more than 80% of your work done. The rest will fall into place. What measures should a responsible citizen take before sharing news or stories online? I think one of the best techniques that I've seen that citizens use, particularly with me, is that when they see a certain piece of information, they send it to me or they send it to other credible journalists. So if you are in Nigeria, you know who the credible journalists are. You send that information to them and say, is this true or is it not true? And journalists are able to assist, or you go and check on Google, or you can use artificial intelligence tools to check whether that information is true. You can have two artificial intelligence tools that you can compare what they give you, and compare with Google, and before you share. And I always encourage people that if in doubt, ask. Make sure that whatever you're sharing is not fake news. Yeah, I mean, activism, politics is a form of activism. So it's a good place to be if you want to be a politician, to be an activist. Then there are some people like us who have vowed that we have no interest in going into politics. I'm just doing my work, but I'm an activist. I've come to accept that. Of course, in certain countries like Zimbabwe, it's used in a derogatory manner. They think that they are insulting you by calling you an activist. But yes, the kind of work that I do is journalism, but it has a bit of activism in it because it's a crusade against corruption. So I've become an anti-corruption activist. So in 2022, I won the United Nations International Anti-Corruption Award. That was based on my journalism, but also based on my activism against corruption. So yeah, it's something that I've embraced, and activism, indeed, it's a good route if you want to go into politics. It would have been a brilliant route for me if I was interested in becoming a politician one day.
All right. I think that is the last question, if I'm not mistaken. I obviously should thank you very much for your very comprehensive responses to those questions. And I just want to ask my final question. If you have any piece of advice, any parting words about the power of the media in exposing hidden truths in this world we're living in now. Any parting words as we bring it to a close?
I would like to say, as journalists, we are change agents. Our job is not just to report news, but is to put out material out there that will help our people to think critically. Critical thought, critical thinking is important. And we should put information out there that helps our people to imagine. Every time when I am on the internet, I look for material that inspire people, to show people that, look, this hospital was built in this country. This is how much it cost. The money that has been stolen so far in the first 2 months of the year in Zimbabwe could have built 3 hospitals like this. And when you give people a context, they are then able to visualize and realize how bad things are or how good things are if they're good. So it's important for us as journalists to inspire the citizens, and to use investigative journalism as a tool to help stop corruption, because most of the problems in Africa are caused by corruption. Isn't it a joke that Nigeria, with so much oil, would have to import petrol from a country that has bought crude oil from it, processed it elsewhere, and brings it back? So when you see something that is good, like what Dangote did, we need to promote it across the continent. The Chinese are coming to pillage our natural resources. They are taking them to China and refining them and selling them back to us as batteries. Zimbabwe has got one of the largest lithium deposits in the world, but we are having to allow the Chinese to come and plant our lithium, and then they bring it back as batteries. If you look at someone like Elon Musk, we have got various views about him, but the one thing that you can't take away from him is the ingenuity, the ability to imagine what the world could be. This is a guy who was born in South Africa. Perhaps he couldn't have gotten the same opportunity and platform to do what he's doing now in the United States of America. So he got a conducive environment. So our job is to inspire our people that if the environment becomes conducive, your life can be better. If the environment becomes conducive, you will not die from easily treatable disease. You should actually have medical insurance. You should have electricity 24/7, not those generators that are always booming in Nigeria or in Zimbabwe. One of the most affluent areas in Zimbabwe is called Borodale. The most affluent go-to shopping mall is called Sam Levy. And when you get there, generators are humming everywhere. This is where the elite go to shop. They can't even supply electricity at the places that they use, that they go and spend the money that they've looted from the public. That is how bad governance is in Africa. And it's important for us, wherever we go around the world, when we see how other parts of the world operate. I see Larry Madao from Kenya does that on his Twitter handle. He was recently in one of the countries that every African dictator says they want their country to be like, but they just don't do it because it requires work and it requires them not to steal. In Singapore, he was showing that on his Twitter handle. To imagine, I posted 2 days ago a video of Shanghai in China, and I was telling people that China was as bad as we were, if not worse, in the 60s. But look at it today. Because of leadership, it transformed from being this rundown country to a first world country to becoming the second biggest economy in the world. We have the resources to do so. In fact, the Democratic Republic of Congo has got enough water to power the rest of Africa. Every electrical need in Africa can be powered from the DRC, but we don't have the right leadership to make sure that it happens. All the important natural resources that are needed to make smartphones are coming from the DRC, but yet the people in the DRC are the poorest in the world. They don't have healthcare, they don't have schools, they don't have roads, they struggle. It's only a few minority a political elite that survive through the looting of public funds. So it's important for us to realize that as the media, as citizens, we have a role, and we should use that role and we should use social media platforms responsibly to make sure that we make sure that whatever we visualize in our dreams come to pass.
Wow, wow. This has really been profound. Thank you so much, Hopewell Chinono. I always leave you thinking more about how much more we can be, and therefore how much more we can do. Sincerely, I want to thank you for your time this evening. Thank you for joining us at the African Governance Institute for Development. Thank you for sharing insights. Thank you for sharing your stories with us. And I'm sure we would all leave here a lot more inspired to be more and to do more. Thank you very much for your time this evening. I also want to thank every member that has joined this webinar this evening. There is a survey in the chat box. Please do click on the link so that we can continue to know the areas you would like us to talk about and certainly how we can serve you better. But once again, Hopewell Chinono, thank you so much. As a Tutu fellow, I respect our seniors that have gone before us and still doing amazing work. And just to let you know, you inspire many of us, and we hope we can continue to speak truth to power, and we can continue to show the type of courageous leadership you have continued to show. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. Let's have a good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Next webinar will be in 2 weeks. We look forward to having you. Please fill the survey before you leave so that we can get more information on how to serve you better. On behalf of the entire team over here, thank you for joining us this evening. Until we see you again. Have a good evening.